Okay, so welcome to this webinar about preparing for admissions tests. Today we're going to cover pre-registration required tests. So that is the ESAT, the TMUA, the UCAT, and the LNAT. My name's Tess. I'm the school liaison officer here at Morton College. But most of the things I say today are probably going to be relevant for most colleges at Cambridge University because these tests are used by all the colleges. And if there is any difference, so there's some difference later down the line with computer science, I will point those out if there are things like discrepancies between colleges. So why do we use admissions tests here at Cambridge? Competition for places is incredibly high, and most of our applicants have really fantastic academic records, especially within the sciences. A lot of people have the same subjects for A level, and a lot of them are predicted A's and A stars. And therefore, we use admissions tests to just try and push them that tiny bit more and see how they do in a test where we're really looking for that high ability skill. So rather than using the same things that you might do on A level, we try to push that knowledge a bit further and give you some kind of unusual test questions and try and test your knowledge in a new scenario. We can assess your skills for your chosen course and your subject-specific knowledge and also your aptitude. So it's not just about what you know, it's about how your skills are suited to that course. And therefore, you may be an A-star student and be fantastic at A levels, but your skills may not be the best suited for the Cambridge course. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So how do we use these admissions assessments? Well, they play a small part within the whole admissions process. They are not the most important. They're not the least important. They're not considered in isolation. We also will look at things like your academic records, so your GCSEs and your predicted A-level grades or IB, things like your personal statement and teacher reference, your written work if that's applicable, possibly for law, and any interviews that you have as well. There isn't normally a pass mark for the admissions assessment. Rather, we would kind of rank you, compare you against each other. So it's more, think of it more as like a kind of a big curve as opposed to there being a pass mark. And therefore, you obviously still trying to do your best, trying to get the highest grades, but there isn't a certain grade that we think isn't good enough, and there's no cut-off in that respect. It's not the case that admissions tests are kind of irrelevant once you get to interview. We will still look back on how you scored at the admissions test even after your interview because we do take that holistic approach to the application process. So, first of all, the LNAT, the Law National Aptitude Test. Some of you may have already taken this. Hopefully, you're not on this call if you have already done it, but it has already opened. And as long as you take it before the 15th of October, it is accepted for Cambridge University. So the last date to book this would be the 15th of September because you normally have to book it at least a month in advance. So that is next Monday. If you have not yet booked your LNAT, I would really encourage you to do that, possibly after this call over the weekend, and get that sorted. Now you have to take this test at an approved testing centre. This is run by Pearson VUE, and it costs £75 to book. Now there are bursaries available, so it is worth looking to see if you'd be eligible for a bursary. So things like free school meals, people premium, low-income families, they'll be eligible for the bursary. I would say because the LNAT is used for quite a lot of universities, a lot of them are Russell Group universities, please do not be put off by the fee because it's the same cost, applied to all of those universities. And I think, you'll probably do very well at those universities. It isn't worth being put off by that fee and going to a university that you're not as interested in. There are also access arrangements available. So if you are, say, entitled to extra time in your GCSEs and A-level exams, or if you need things like a sight reader, things like that, you can have the same access arrangements for the LNAT as well. However, you need to tell the venue that rather than tell the university. It is all organised through the venue. There is normally an earlier deadline for the access arrangements, so please do look on the website and kind of get in touch with them if you do need the access arrangements. You'll probably also need proof to, validate these access arrangements. So getting in touch with people at your school, if you say have extra time at school, the same will apply. You'll need, a teacher reference for that. Now the LNAT is broken down into two sections, section A and section B. The first is a multiple choice section, and it's 95 minutes long. Second is an essay. And then we get two scores. So we get your score for the multiple choice, and I think that is at 42, and we get your essay, and we mark the essay ourselves. And you will find out the results of the multiple choice. You will not find out the results of the essay because it is marked by us, so we kind of keep that to ourselves. So the test, section one, there's 42 argumentative choice questions related to 12 argumentative passages. So it's testing your reading comprehension. They will say, in the questions, which, passage said this, or is about reading those passages. There's 12 passages, and the questions will relate to a few of them and kind of making those comparisons. And it's about, yeah, that really close reading skill and be able to take quite a lot of information in a short amount of time and process that. Because it's a multiple choice, even if you do run out of time, I would recommend still just guessing. There aren't any negative marks for this question. Um, so obviously practice it in advance, but if you do run out of time on the actual day, then it is still just worth filling in those multiple choice questions randomly. Now, section two is an essay. It's less time, it's only 40 minutes, and it's in response to one of three possible questions. It'll be marked essentially at Cambridge, and it tests your ability to construct a compelling argument and then to reach a conclusion. Now, as I've written at the top, the LNAT does not test your knowledge of the law or any other subject. We don't require things like law A level or anything like that. Instead, it's about your aptitude. That's what the A in the LNAT stands for, it's aptitude. We expect around 500 to 600 words in the essay section. We're not expecting a really long, kind of several pages of response. So it's just about how to kind of really like quickly form this argument and be quite concise in your argumentation. Somebody has asked us Cambridge mark all the honor essays, even if you're not applying here. No, so we mark the ones who apply to us, but those essays will also be marked by the other universities you're applying to, and they may mark them differently to us. So basically, when you sit the LNAT, you'll choose the universities you're applying to, and I think each one will get sent a copy of your multiple choice thing that will already be marked centrally, and we'll get a copy of your essay, and it's up to us to kind of mark that against our own criteria. Uh, and as you can see, um, this is section one advice. When I go to section two advice, I'll talk a little bit more about the essay. So for section one, carefully read the entire passages before attempting the questions. Notice the language commonly used in section one questions. So things like stated, inferred, implied, and concluded, those kind of verbs come up quite a lot. And understanding that the tiny nuances between certain verbs, so things like, implied versus stated. Because one of the questions might be which passage, which one kind of implied this? And one might, quite obviously state it. So it's not going to be that one. So it's about seeing those very small differences between the passages that may be all quite similar. Read the passage and the answer choices closely to differentiate fact from opinion. Don't panic if you don't know the meaning of a word. You can make quite an educated guess based on the rest of the passage. And like I said, because it's multiple choice and it's not negatively marked, if you do make quite an educated guess, you're probably going to get it right. Um, and there are quite a lot of practice papers on the LNAT website, so I would, have a go at this. As I put here, because there's 42 questions and 95 minutes, you've got 2.25 minutes per question. So it is worth doing some practices and see if you can kind of, time yourself in that way, maybe divide it up, so that what does that time feel like to you? I don't think you are allowed things like a clock in the exam to kind of time yourself in that way. So it's probably good to kind of have that kind of, feeling of the time rather than watching the clock. Um, okay, I saw some more questions for that. I'll just address them here. Um, Someone said, are the argumentative passages given before the test, or during the test, or to revise for? They're given during the test. So you will open up section two, and there'll be three questions, and you choose one of them. So the section two advice, you pick the one that's most suitable for you. Whichever one allows you to draw on your existing knowledge. This does not need to be existing knowledge of the law, but it could be, if you have maybe covered some cases, if you know some cases quite well, or if you've read something in the news, it is worth stating those. But the questions are quite open-ended, and you shouldn't feel intimidated that you need to kind of revise for this. You should just be able to pick one of the questions quite comfortably. The test is online, so this will be typed. And like I said, we expect about 500 to 600 words, so about one page of A4. You've only got 40 minutes, so it's not going to be a super long essay. Um, if you don't have much knowledge of the topic, or if you are making some assumptions, it is worth stating them in the introduction. This is something that you do normally in university essays anyway. You can say, for the sake of this essay, I'm taking this to be mean this. And that means that if throughout the essay, it's not really, you know, that kind of correct, at least you've stated that assumption at the beginning, and then, your structuring, your argumentation still makes sense, even if the kind of the essay has some kind of errors in that respect. Um, for example, some of the questions that have come up in previous years have been things like, good democracy should place limits on majority rule, discuss. So if you know anything about democracy, if you kind of follow politics in the news, you might be able to talk about that. I think something that's come up before is, should pornography be illegal, or should capital punishment kind of be allowed? So it's not really right or wrong answers. It's about your discussion of these quite big issues, really. So it's quite good to weigh up both sides, consider your structure with taking into account the time restriction. You might only have time for an introduction, maybe paragraph for, argument, paragraph against, and then a conclusion. And I think the best essays that I've read in the past few years are ones that are quite nuanced, but still kind of come to a conclusion at the end. I think ones that are entirely, one-sided, maybe lack that nuance, because the questions that they ask are often questions that need a bit of nuance. They are quite open-ended, and there isn't really just one way to approach it. But I still think it's quite good to settle on, um, make a decision by the end of it. I think practicing essays on unfamiliar topics is quite good. So if you do maybe read newspapers, try and see what is topical at the moment and write an essay based on it, or look at some LNAT past paper questions and write responses. 40 minutes is not very long, so you could do a couple of these per week, and get really good at it by the end of it. Um, and yeah, try to think creatively. What are the implications of your argument? Is the question itself flawed? These are ways to really draw out that nuance, and seem quite clever in doing so. Um, just to address some of the questions that have come in. So how many questions you have to choose from? You have three, you only choose one. If the question is flawed, should you mention this in the essay? Yeah, so this isn't something that you should just kind of think about in your head. If you have an issue with the question itself, maybe you could kind of pick that apart. So for example, if one of the questions is, should pornography be illegal? You know, what are you defining as pornography? Things like that. You could kind of pick apart the question in that respect. What does illegal mean? Because maybe pornography is illegal to under 18s, but things like that. It's about picking it apart in that respect of saying, is this question itself hard to answer because there are so many things to consider within the question. So that's what I mean by, is it flawed? Or if you want some very specific advice on LNAT Part 2, I would recommend watching this YouTube video that we recorded a few years ago with one of our law directors of studies, Neil Jones. So he talks about how he approaches marking the essay. And he says that at Cambridge, now this may not be the same at other universities, but at Cambridge they will read two essays kind of side by side. So they'll compare two LNAT essays, often responses to the same question. And they'll basically mark it by saying, this one is better than this one. And then they'll grab a third essay and they'll compare that to the other two. And they'll say, where does this rank compared to the two we've just ranked already? And so they basically have like a line of essays from kind of best to worst in that respect. And then from that, they can grade them. So the top 10% will get a grade 10, and then grade 9, grade 8. This isn't obviously not a perfect system, but because of that, the LNAT is not the only thing that we take into consideration. And the LNAT essay, there are people who don't score as highly on the LNAT essay, but still get invited to interview and still get places. There are people who score really, really highly on the LNAT, but don't even make it to interview. So it's not the only thing we consider. It's just a way to kind of see how you act under pressure, what arguments you can think of, off the top of your head, and like I said, your aptitude for the course. But like I said, please do go and watch that video. Neil Jones really breaks down what he's looking for in those essays, and he gives you some other kind of sample questions to work from, which I think would be quite useful for you to see. So moving on to the ESAT, if we have any more questions for the LNAT, I will have a kind of Q&A section at the end, so we can always come back to that as well. So for the ESAT, this must be taken on the 9th or the 10th of October with students wanting to study quite a range of courses, so chemical engineering and biotechnology, engineering, natural sciences, both biological and physical, or veterinary science. And this is also taken at Pearson Test Centre. And unlike the LNAT, where there was quite a lot of dates to choose between, there is only 2 dates to take this. That means it is a bit more competitive to get a space at those test centres. So if you haven't booked it already, please do look, after this webinar is finished, at booking a spot because your local test centre may be booked up and therefore you may need to travel to another test centre. Please do check that. Again, there is a fee for this, but there are bursaries available. Booking closes at the end of this month. Um, Unfortunately, access arrangements has already closed. So if you needed access arrangements, the booking for that's closed. It is worth emailing or phoning them up to see if you can get that changed if you haven't booked one yet. I would kind of inquire about that. I don't want you to be, um, unfairly treated because you require access arrangements and you couldn't get them. So this consists of individual multiple choice modules lasting 40 minutes each. Now there is a choice of 5 and you only do 3. And you do the 3 that you either feel strongest on, or if you're applying to engineering, you will have to do Maths 1, Maths 2, and physics. So the entire test takes 120 minutes. Quite a long test. I don't know if you did any tests that were 2 hours long for your GCSEs, but the reason to practice this is more for stamina reasons than anything else. It's good to know what a 2 hour long test feels like. Now, the results for each module of the ESAT are reported on a scale that runs from 1 to 9, and 9 is the highest. And it's recorded as a 1 decimal place, so you'll get like a 4.3 or 6.7, that kind of thing. And you'll receive your results on the 14th of November. Now, obviously, this date is after the UCAS deadline, so you won't know how you did on this test until after you have applied to Cambridge. Um, I, we will receive it before that. We'll receive it around the same time that you take it, but you have to wait a bit longer, and we can't tell you how you did, unfortunately, in that time period. So which modules will you take? If you're applying to Chem Natural Sciences, or Vet Med, you'll complete maths and 2 of the others, and it's up to you to choose. So obviously, if you're doing chemical engineering, you might want to take chemistry and maths 2, or maybe chemistry and physics. If you're applying for biological natural sciences, you'll probably take biology and chemistry. Veterinary medicine, you might take biology and chemistry as well. But if you're applying for engineering, you have to do maths 1, maths 2, and physics, so you don't get the choice there. Now, this test is also used for some courses at Imperial and some courses at UCL. So it might be worth seeing if they have different modules that they require you to take, just in case they are different. Again, there is no pass mark. You're not aiming for 100%. Rather, it's to get as many questions correct as you can. Now, the ESAT is, designed for high achievers. It's designed for these really competitive courses at Russell Group universities. And therefore, there's no kind of foundation level questions. They're all trying to push you and challenge you. And therefore, don't be intimidated if all the questions are quite hard. They are designed to be. Like I said, you're not aiming for 100%. And I've seen people in the past few years be interviewed with scores as low as, 3 or a 4 out of that 9. So again, not many people get 100%. I would say anybody getting less than 3 is probably ruled out for interview. This is just from, looking at our past track record. So you are kind of aiming for above a 3, but like I said, very few people are getting those 8s and 9s there. I think it's pretty rare to get anywhere near 100% there. And there is plenty more information on the ESAT website, including past paper tests. Now, I'm actually going to, just to take you through where you can find out things like the syllabus. I'm just going to share my screen with the website. Okay, can I just check that people can see um, my browser? Okay, fab. So this is the ESAT and the TMUA website. It is the same website for both. And if you go on the website and you go on before your test, prepare, and scroll to the bottom, you can see there's ESAT and the TMUA. We don't use the Tara. You can ignore that. Now you can find the specification here, and this basically shows you all the things that could come up within each of the sections. So it will tell you what knowledge to, what topics to revise, really. So if you are, thinking about doing the biology sections, what part of biology is included? So which part of the A-level course, which part of the GCSE biology course could come up. Um, so, for example, in biology, do you know and understand the structure of the following cells? And so if you think, actually, I don't remember that, you now know what to go and revise. So there's quite a lot. This is a large document, but it is worth going through this spec and making sure you are pretty certain on all these different things. The next thing that is worth looking at, and this is again relevant for both the TMUA and the ESAT, is the guide. So below the specification, there is the ESAT guide, and here there is notes and mathematics, which is the same thing as the guide, which I can show you in a second as well. The ESAT guide basically it's like a textbook almost. So again, if you go in biology, rather than showing you what could come up, this instead tells you the answer of the things that could come up. So when it says, it shows you what it would mean by a bacterial cell, or when it says we want to know what definitions are, it tells you the definition that they would expect you to kind of know. Um, and maths as well, if it says, you know, right, you know, this is how we want you to carry out this kind of equation, it would demonstrate the expectation they have. And it should be the same as your GCSE and your A-level syllabus, but it basically has a textbook of the kind of answers they're expecting. So that's in the ESAT guide. And then in the TMAT guide, it's notes and mathematics. Apologies, guys, it's a bit slow. Um, Again, it kind of says, this is how they write their equations. This is the kind of formula that we use. Um, so it is well worth going through all of that. Um, okay. Now check you can all see the PowerPoint once again. Yes, thank you. Um, So ESAT advice, obviously revise your GCSE and AS level content. So, year 12, if you've not sat an actual AS test. When faced with the question in the exam, try to consider which topic. So which topic within the spec, which topic within your GCSEs is it referring to? So it may be a ratio question, but it's not really phrased in the same way that ratio questions in GCSE and A-level maths are phrased. So it's about using the knowledge you have and applying it to an unfamiliar situation. Like I said, go through the spec. And if you've run out of ESAT past papers, because there aren't that many ESAT past papers, it's a fairly new test. I would start on the ENGAA test, which is the old engineering entrance exam, or the natural sciences admissions test. So ENGAA or the NSAA, depending on which course you're applying to. Now, like I said, they're not ordered by difficulty. There aren't really easy questions. There might be questions that are easier to you because you are better at those topics, but most of the questions are harder than you'd probably, expect at the beginning of a A-level test, for example. You don't lose marks for incorrect answers, so don't be afraid to attempt questions, even if you're unsure. And I think this is multiple choice as well. And you are not allowed to bring your own kind of resources in. So you're not allowed like your own pens, calculators, paper, but they will provide you with, I think it's a whiteboard and a pen that they provide you with. They say it's an erasable sheet, so I would imagine that's a whiteboard. But that is in the frequently asked questions on the ESAT and the TMUA website. There are some websites here that I've also linked. So Isaac Physics and I Want to Study Engineering. They're quite good for maths and physics. I would recommend looking at those questions. They are also very good for interviews. So if you are thinking about applying to Cambridge, you're going to have to go for an interview as well. And the same questions will be very relevant for the interview. Like I said, focus on time management. It's a really long test and try to pace yourself and just kind of know what it feels like to spend 40 minutes on each section. The TMUA is very, very similar to the ESAT in terms of the kind of dates and the admin bit. Although this is on the 13th and 14th rather than the 9th and 10th. But once again, there's only those two dates available if you're going to be applying to Cambridge. It's for computer science and economics. At other universities, you might need this for maths, but we do not require it for maths. Again, you take a Pearson Test Centre and it costs you £75. The booking deadline is the same as well, so the end of the month. The test lasts 2.5 hours, so it's even longer than the ESAT, and it consists of two different papers, 75 minutes each. And they have 20 multiple choice questions in each. And again, it's on that scale. Very similar to the ESAT as well. People do get interviewed with quite low scores comparatively. People get in like those kind of threes and fours. But very few people get in like eights, nines. We see a big range. And I'd say the kind of people that get in are normally getting around five and six. There are people who've scored very well in the TMUA who do not get in because then they've kind of fallen short at interview. So it's not the be all and end all, but we do kind of use it as that cutoff for interviews. So if we have a load of people applying and they have a load of people who get ones or twos in the TMUA, they're probably the first people to get deselected before interview. And again, the results are released on the 14th of November, so you won't know how you did until after you've applied. What I would say about that though is if you don't get invited to interview, you can maybe look at what you got in the team UA and that might give you a clue as to why you didn't get invited to interview. So hopefully if you aren't invited to interview, you're not super shocked by this because you can see your score by then. We normally send out invites to interview between mid and late November. So you will probably have already got your results from the TMUA and ESAT or around the same time. So the TMUA tests in paper one, your application of mathematical knowledge, and paper two, your mathematical reasoning. It is again worth going through that spec and seeing what they mean by both of those and the kind of questions that come up in each section. Now, it's not a calculator test, and so you're not allowed to calculate it in there. Again, you're not allowed your own pens. It's just a whiteboard that they provide. So it will be very similar to a non-calculator paper that you do in your A levels. The same test will be used if you're applying to courses that require the TMUA at unis such as Imperial, LSE, UCL, Durham, etc. And again, no pass mark. You're not aiming for 100%. If you exhaust past TMUA papers, which there are more TMUA papers, but if you run out of them, it's worth looking at the previous either economics entrance exams or the computer science entrance exams that we had. You will be able to find those on kind of old Cambridge websites. I've had a look from them before. They're quite easy to find. If you type in Cambridge computer science test, there'll be some that come up. If it's not the TMUA, I would look for those as because there'll be very similar questions, even if they're not currently used. So with computer science, I just want to state that certain colleges ask for you to do another test, and this is the computer science aptitude test. Um, so this is at Trinity College and Peterhouse College. You will have to do this as well as the TMUA, and you normally do this closer to interview. So I don't think they would make you do it unless you got invited to interview. I think at Trinity they actually ask you to do it on the same day as your interview, and then they mark it before your interview. So it's a quite quick turnaround. They will organize that for you. Unlike the team, you don't need to book this, you don't have to do anything. They do it all for yourself. But if you're thinking of applying to one of those colleges, please bear in mind this is a test you're going to have to sit. So it is maybe worth revising that as well. And I imagine there's a lot of crossover between this and the TMUA. But have a look at their website and have a look at their past papers. I wouldn't let this put you off if you're desperate to go to Trinity or Peterhouse. Just bear it in mind that it is an extra hoop you have to jump through if you want to go to one of those colleges. Um, so we asked the question about grades in the first day, same to the second day. Could you just clarify what you mean by that? I'm a bit unsure on what that question means. If you're able to clarify, and we'll come to it at the end in the Q&A, that'd be great. And finally, I'll just move on to the UCAT. Again, a lot of people might have already taken this because the testing is between 7th of July and the 26th of September, so there's already been quite a long testing period. Again, taken at a Pearson Test Centre, and it costs you £70. Booking opened really early, opened in June. The end for access arrangements is the 16th of September, so that is next Tuesday. If you haven't yet booked your UCAT and you are entitled to access arrangements, please do get that booked soon. I mean, booking in itself closes on the 19th, so you've got a very short window before booking closes. We recently made a webinar on our YouTube page about the UCAT specifically, where we got one of our medics to talk through the UCAT. It's quite a long webinar. It's, I think, over an hour. It's really thorough and it goes through every section of the UCAT. I would recommend you look at our YouTube page. It was the last webinar uploaded. It's got some really great advice, and the medic even talks about different, websites he used to revise. So please do refer to that. Now, unlike the other tests, you'll get your results back immediately, so this actually can be used as a guide to determine which unis you want to apply to. Now, Cambridge is a bit unhelpful in this respect because we don't actually have a minimum criteria that we look for in the UCAT. We haven't got a kind of cut-off that we state on our website, whereas other universities might. They might say, if you haven't got this, it's not even worth you applying, and therefore you'll know once you've sat the test, never mind, I'm not going to waste an application on that uni because they don't want a UCAT score like this. However, Cambridge aren't going to tell you that. This is because the UCAT is still fairly new for us. Last year was the only year we started using it, so we're still kind of experimenting with how we want to implement it in our admissions process and how much weight to give the UCAT. So, I mean, it's worth noting that we don't use the situational judgment score as part of our assessment, but we will just look at the overall cognitive subtest score. I don't mean to kind of worry you with this. I'd say if your heart is set on Cambridge, regardless of the UCAT score you get, make an application because we aren't giving it too much, attention yet because we are still just implementing the UCAT. So, like I said, don't expect to get every question right. They're designed to be challenging. You've probably never sat a test that is designed just for high achievers before. So this may feel really unusual. You may be used to kind of acing tests and whizzing through them all and knowing quite confidently that you got them all right. You won't feel like that with this, unfortunately. But don't panic if you don't think you performed well. Like I said, a lot of people don't score incredibly well, but they still gain places at university. We're just using this to see how you act on the day. And we know that there are circumstances sometimes that control on the day. Maybe you're not feeling well, maybe you've missed some school, things like that. Um, this is just one kind of point in time that reflects your skills. If anything just dramatically wrong on the day, so if there are things like a fire alarm at the test center or the internet goes off, things like that, it's worth getting the test center to kind of validate that and send it over to us. And if there are things that are, personal issues instead, so if you're ill, getting a doctor's note to validate that. Anything you can to kind of prove that this is truthful and sent to us is useful for us, and we will file that within your application. What we don't want is for you to kind of stay silent on this, and then when you maybe don't get in January, if you don't get in past your interview, say, well, actually, this happened on the day. By then, it's kind of too late. You need to tell us as soon as it's happened, and then we'll kind of take it. We'll take it seriously. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now and move on to questions. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and I'll spend the next 20 minutes going through those.